Hello, and welcome to the Learning and Development Podcast, sponsored by infoprolearning. As always, I'm your host, Nolan Hout. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by not one, but two amazing thought leaders in the corporate learning world. We have Gemma Towersey and Dr. Gent Ahmetaj. Both work for a company called MindTools, but in different capacities. Gent is the head of insight and analytics, where he spends a lot of his time digging deep into complex data and making it really simple for people like me. Um, and then Gemma is a learning experience consultant who spends a lot of her time finding that happy mix between creating learning programs that make a business impact, but also people genuinely like and care and complete. As you can tell, both of those have such different backgrounds and specialties, which is what makes this podcast session today so dynamic, and I'm excited to get it started. And the focus today is going to be all on ROI and how we can measure the impact specifically of those like softer skill leadership training, coaching, things like that. But here's the spoiler. We're going to end up covering a lot more than that. So let's get on with it and let's meet our guests. Hello, Gent and Gemma. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Thank you for having us, Nolan.
Of course. And, we have a lot to talk about today. One of my favorite topics that I think I cover, whether podcast guests are coming prepared to talk about it or not, and it's the ROI of programs and training programs. But before we get into that, I would love to just have a brief intro of both of you. One of the things that we have found in this space, whether you're on the tech side, like both of you from MindTools, or you're, in corporate learning environment, the paths are never necessarily straight lined into, I knew I wanted to create a leadership tool my whole life, and that's what I ended up doing. So love to see how you got on the path of where you are today. Maybe we can agree, ladies first, maybe.
I must go first.
Oh, how very gentlemanly of you. Well, I am a learning experience consultant at MindTools, so I work with clients and prospects to understand their challenges, figure out what's causing those, and then work with them to create solutions that fill the gaps. So I do a bit of project management, but mainly work at the first part of this process.
And what did you, like in your university days, did you have an ambition to do that, or were you thinking life would take you one path and then you ended up here?
Yeah, no, I just studied English literature, so this was
Okay.
unexpected. I also did a TEFL course, so teaching English as a foreign language, and I've always been a teacher of sorts. I've taught piano and all sorts of other sort of minor things as a side hustle. And then I started my career in educational publishing, so creating digital assets that sat alongside books for teachers and students at school, so kind of school curricula, and created digital assets for that, and then moved into corporate learning quite a while ago now, and I've been at MindTools for 9 years. So it's been a good journey, and the role has evolved because I sort of started off as an instructional designer and have now a bigger kind of consultancy role.
Is there something that you think draws you to education, like that sector? Because you've been in that, seemingly most of your life. What is it? Do you love to educate people? Is there something about it that is fulfilling? What is it that you think is at the core of that drive?
I just think it's just fascinating bringing in. It has this really lovely blend of arts and science. I could never really settle at school. Although I did end up doing English at university, I did also really enjoy science as well. So I just love the fact that you can bring in psychology and behavioral economics and just be a bit of a magpie for kind of everything that you learn in your own sort of personal life you can bring in as well, and use evidence-led science to really to create things that work. But that's actually really why I've loved getting more into evaluation and working with Gent's team as well, because I think the most frustrating thing being a vendor is that you don't actually necessarily hear from the learners that you're making things for. But with evaluation, you can really, once you start to put in really well structured survey questions, and then you work really closely with your clients to then analyze all of that data. You can then start getting some feedback, and then with Gent's work, you can start looking at all the data that comes in from like kind of measuring impact. Then you really get a sense of whether or not what you've done is great. So yeah, so it's because the role has evolved, it's sort of been endlessly fascinating as well, and that's why I really like
Yeah,
about it.
there's something. So I'm a marketer by, I guess trade or background or whatever, and a lot of what I do today is still in that field. And it was fascinating as I started speaking with clients more and more. I realized that there was such a big overlap, um, and we started to have like a really good unity between understanding a lot of the issue with training today is getting people to care, right?
Yeah.
And that's all marketing is like, do you care enough about your product? The nice thing about learning, as you mentioned, is so marketing gives you do much the same. You've got the science of why would people buy this and what would motivate them. But then I feel like in the learning space, it's a little bit more fulfilling
Yeah.
than they spent $50 buying your Tic Tac or whatever
Yeah.
it is. So
Yeah, the
it's
what's
like
in it for me bit as well. If you can
exactly,
really
yeah. It's
sell
a
that,
little.
and
That's a little
yeah,
bit more, heartwarming than maybe a marketing ad agency. So,
yeah.
very good. Well, Gent, tell us, what is your story?
Can I just say it was so crazy that both me and you, Nolan, picked up our coffee mugs, sipped at the right exact time together in harmony as Gemma spoke. It was like almost like literally we did the same actions. It was crazy. Um,
Synchronicity. Wow.
where,
Already.
how did I come to where I am? My career started in kind of security research. So I
Hmm.
was very interested, and I worked for an organization looking at um, conflict like specifically conflict in Libya, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and trying to understand the landscape there and the reasoning behind some of the conflict and some of the institutional structures there. So that was really cool. I came across super fascinating topics like there is a paradox in resource. So it's called the resource paradox, where organizations that have, sorry, not organizations, countries that have natural resources do worse economically over time
Huh.
that countries don't have natural resources. And there are multiple cool reasons for, I mean, not cool for the people, but generally from a research
Right,
perspective,
right.
very cool because it's institutional. They develop these structures that are rentier. They call it a rentier economy. So the money trickles downwards. They pay off basically people
Yeah,
versus countries like the UK where they build 100 years worth of bureaucracy to extract money from people. And
yeah.
those institutions then create autonomy and create checks and balances between each other. And anyway, very, very interesting. I then moved on to the NGO and government space, worked in the Balkans for quite some time. It kind of was a natural fit. And then I married my wife, which asked me to come back to the UK. And I was like, I shall do so. And I had two kind of offers between two companies, very similar area of work. So it was like more work psychology,
Yeah, yeah.
workplace learning. And I chose the one that had an office in an abandoned old church and looked terrible versus the other one, which had an office in Somerton House looking over the Thames and
Ooh.
beautiful. I think I made the right decisions. Um, but that is why I am in this position now. And the position that I'm in now, I'm the head of learning, sorry, head of insights and analytics and MindTools. I look specifically at very interesting organizational problems related to impact within the learning, talent, and development space.
Yeah, so I mean, clear for you, it seems like that drive is just a curiosity of like, let us get to the core of what this issue is. Like, I think when you looked at some of those countries and why are they in the position they are, to make the leap that it's from this to, well, because they have an abundance of resources that should make them incredibly wealthy, and that's why they're not doing well. It's not a very causal connection, it's not a direct link. So wonderful, and that's a great not intentional, again, between the coffee mug kind of toast that we did and that answer. I feel like we're starting this podcast pretty well, because that leads us to this idea, and what we're going to talk about today is just this measurement. of ROI, and some of the challenges that organizations face. And Gemma and Jen, both of them are with this company called MindTools. Do you want to, one of you want to give a quick, 30-second primer of what MindTools is, just so that the audience understands your perspective and how we're facing this problem?
Go on, Ken.
Nice one, Gemma. You threw me under the bus.
Hey, I went
I
first
like
last
it.
time.
Mind tools. So I would say the ethos of Mind Tools is building better managers. So we're all about trying our best to better understand what managers do, the challenges they face, what leaders do, the challenges that they face, and supporting them in all across their career, across different spectrums, across different ages, across different entry points, with either that's resources at a point of need, whether that's with specific customized solutions that Gemma's team do, with insight solutions that my team does, or with more like off-the-shelf solutions, such as like our content hub and other kind of things that we do.
Right. So the real, the value prop, as you said, is making better managers.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest challenges that I know a lot of our clients face and gets brought up a lot in the podcast is, measuring ROI for things like sales training, onboarding, customer service, can have somewhat more of a direct link. Okay, my onboarding cost was $1 million, now it's $500,000, or retention went from 13% to 5%, and within that, just that batch. But the complexities, I always say, they're like, oh yeah, that's great, but then how do you showcase an ROI of something like a leadership training or coaching network? So that, I guess, is really the biggest question: is what is that biggest obstacle that organizations face when they're coming to invest in their manager development? How are they showing that my investment here is going to come back to the company in either short or long term? What are the strategies that you help your clients employ?
Should I go first? I'll
Sure.
try and go first. Yeah. I think key to all this is that this idea of return on investment is kind of a financial term, right? And in a lot of cases, learning and development has not really been in that space for a very long time, or at least has shied away from having business speech or like business language
Hmm.
attributed to itself. A lot of the time, we're very learner focused. So things that we usually see people measure is like learning hours, completion rates, acceptance rates, bounce rates, uh, compliance aspects, and ROI is very alien to us in terms of how we can measure it. And frankly, it's very difficult to get to that level of measurement where you're measuring actual financial output. Um, Dave Ulrich, who is a really great author and prolific writer in the space, he talks also about return on intangibles. So this idea of getting returns on things that are not really touchable all the time, right? Like finance is not everything in a company. Sometimes you have indirect causes of it.
Yeah.
So we do advise companies that if they do want to measure something, they need to think about the long term. Behavior change does not happen overnight, nor does any kind of financial outcome arrive within minutes, months, or even sometimes years. So you have to have the framework in place for the data collection that you want to do, for the questions that you want to answer over time. And when you put that in place, you start collecting the right data, and you can answer the right questions. So that would be my first advice: is start from kind of scratch if you can. Think about the framework that you want to build and think about the long term, not just the short term.
Very good, Gemma.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you asked about obstacles as well. I mean, there's so many against that. It's not easy getting the data itself, but then you've got all the confounding other influences on performance change that you've got to try and separate out. So there's a lot of complexity around actually how you design that so you can separate it. So it needs to be designed in right from the start. Otherwise, you might miss your chance to create an evaluation process that allows you to get that complexity more kind of unpick it.
Yeah.
yeah, like, and another thing, again, mentioned it does just take time, and so you have to be comfortable with the lag, and to I guess a lot of businesses just want immediate results, and that's just not reality. So you have to be comfortable with waiting and seeing, and and just spending the time designing in data collection points over time, and seeing what happens.
So I want to specifically double click into the data collection points and kind of understand what those are. But it sounds like, in my mind, kind of I'm thinking of two things. One, Gent, what you were saying is kind of what is the quote where it says, like, what if we train our people and leave? And then the person says,
what
well,
if we
what if we
don't
don't and they
and
stay?
they stay?
So like that came to mind when you were, talking about it, is like, if you don't believe it's going to make sense, then let's just keep them where they are, and they'll just be there for the next 3 years and leave. And then we'll bring the next people in 3 years and leave if you want. That's the alternative. And I think sometimes people do miss out on it is, because it is hard to sell a belief, right? To a CFO of, I'm going to invest $1 million in this program, on this belief of that. And one of the things that I've really, our CEO has said many times when we're with clients is, when you look at the marketing of these sales tools, marketing tools, whatever, HubSpot, you look at HubSpot, you look at Salesforce, two really common tools. They'll say, Salesforce will say, after implementing Salesforce, sales rep productivity climbed 5 million%. Now, is the reality that they bought a CRM tool that salespeople hate to use? No offense to sales, it's a great tool, but salespeople despise any extra work that they have to do. So it's not a Salesforce thing, it's a tool thing. Is the reality that this tool that you have to beg your salespeople to use is the reason for the increase, or is it probably everything else that you've done along the way to improve those sales? And he goes, the answer is that it's probably a little bit of both, but Salesforce is willing to claim the victory. And sometimes learning needs to have the confidence to claim a victory, even if they're not, because everybody else is. Everybody else is claiming this victory. Jump on the bandwagon, claim your own victories when you can find them. So that was like one thing came to mind. But then, and then Gemma, to your point, one of the things that we always say is, like, begin with the end in mind.
Yeah,
and
for sure, you've got to, if you're going to do it properly.
What we found to solidify that, and like make it incredibly real in people's minds, there's a pretty popular, like, award body that measures learning and development programs in the United States. I mean, it's global, but I think it's mostly, in the US. It'd be kind of like the Learning Awards that's over in Europe and London. It's called Brandon Hall. So Brandon Hall is a very templated format for measuring whether this program gets an award. We share that with our clients at the beginning of the project. And we say, now, if we want to win an award, we have to do these things. Now, this fifth component, which is one of the biggest components, is what was the impact on the business? If we don't put something down now, it's going to be really hard to get it afterwards. And we found that no matter how many different ways we tried to ask the question, it wasn't until we actually made it so tangible of, listen, if we do that, we can actually go back and win the award, and the submission writes itself at this point. But if we did the opposite, when we used to do the opposite, and at the end of the program, we'd go to them and say, hey, this was great, let's win an award, and it got to that business metric, they could point to, get to your things. They could point to learner satisfaction, time training, whatever, abandonment percentages, but they couldn't point to those, the ROIs. But coming to those things now, like the actual measurement. So we've identified what our hypothesis is, right? Okay, we think that these things are going to change, but what are those hypotheses? What are the data points that you see? I'm sure it's very case by case, but Are there some that are cross-cutting when you're working with your clients that you see, most of the time there's these, I don't know, 5, 10 metrics that we want to make sure we're putting in at the front of this program so that we're prepared to measure them along the way or afterwards?
I wouldn't say there are specific metrics in that way, just because that clouds the actual purpose of something like this. It's more about categories of metrics that you should think about, right? So um, whenever you're doing a program, large or small, will determine the feasibility of measurement, right? So if you're doing, and I always, with Gemma, we always talk about this. If your program is like £5,000, £10,000, measurement might not be viable here at a good level because it's just too small. You might not need to, it'll cost you more to do it
I
than
was
to
gonna say it'll
actually,
cost you 5,000 to measure.
yeah. So, but if it's like 100,000, 500,000, £1 million, then measurement, I would say, is critical. It has to be involved, right?
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're kind of just throwing it, and it might have the intended consequence, but you don't even know. So the way we would always think about it is think of like almost 3 to 4 categories. There's the business level category, and this is basically KPIs related to what the business is already measuring or is looking towards. So it could be things like retention rates, onboarding speed, growth, revenue, invoicing. All these things are something like what a CFO would look like or what a
Yep.
CEO's reports look like, right? That's what they're looking at. Underneath that is basically employee performance or behavioral change. So it's things like speed to competence. It could be skills application. It could be skills transfer and knowledge transfer. Knowledge movement across the organization is incredibly important. I'm just reading a paper on how machine learning decision making is going to have an effect on organizational learning and how important it is for organizational like learning practitioners to really understand how knowledge flows across the organization. So those measures can be created. You can synthesize multiple measures to create one large measure. And underneath that is experience. And that is more learner focused. That is more learning team focused. So the experience side can be things like perceptions. They can focus on the relationship between, let's say, facilitator and learner, if there is one. You could focus on more behavioral aspect of like course going or completion rates, and all that stuff paints a picture of how the experience of someone going through whatever you've designed, built, created is. And you don't want to make it harder than it is. Learning is already hard, right? It's an uncomfortable thing. You have to have a lot of self-motivation to learn something new, and you go through hardship. You don't want the experience to make it harder. You want it
I,
to be
I,
smooth.
I don't think learning is hard. I think what's hard is trying to teach someone. Once somebody has truly decided I want to learn, I feel like that is the easy part of the day. It's trying to convince somebody to actually that they need to learn. Like was like
It's so,
Twain who said like I always want to learn, but I never want to be taught. It's like
I think it's a muscle though, right? Because I remember seeing a really cool video from this lecturer, and she was basically describing the stage between not knowing and knowing, and kind of drew like squiggles in between, right? And she said, the longer you can stay in this in between phase, the more you're going to develop as a human because you're comfortable with this like deep sense of uncertainty because you don't know you're trying, it's failing, you can't really grasp it, until you get to the knowing part. It's really hard in that middle bit.
oh, I'm going
And
through that right now. I signed up to coach my son's flag football team, American football. And I'm a big guy. I mean, you can see me on screen. You can't see below, but I'm even bigger below the waist or below my chest. We'll
we
try to
understood.
we'll try to
We understood. Don't worry.
yeah.
I got a good grasp of how tall you are.
But long story, so when I played American football, I had to play on the line because I was too big. I wasn't fast enough to run or catch or
Yeah.
anything like that. Well, this league, my position doesn't exist because it's flag football. So they're not blocking. You're not even allowed to touch each other really. And my family is a football family. My dad played at the professional level. We all went to college. I've got 3 brothers. We all went to college and played football in college. And my brother lives and coaches the football team where I live. And it was so embarrassing to call him and say, I don't know a single thing about this particular part of the job. I don't know how you're supposed to
Yeah.
defend these people. I was like, I'm used to
Yeah.
guarding 250-pound people who can barely move. Like, and it was so uncomfortable to admit that something I have watched, I don't know how many hours of this sport I have played, I have done it, to admit this one aspect of the game to my brother of all people that I didn't know. It was really uncomfortable. And I realized actually on my way home after learning that, I was like, I haven't had that feeling in a really long time where I just had to admit and then be embarrassed that I didn't know, but there's no other way to do it. Like faking it wasn't going to help me. Anyway, that just made me think of that.
Yeah. And yeah, it is a really uncomfortable thing. But I think that does speak to um we use as learning designers, we use the LTEM model. I don't know whether you've come across this, Will Thalhimer's model of
No.
evaluation. He's got it's an 8-tier model, and he's looked at the Kirkpatrick 4-part model, which you might have heard of. And he's
I'm
expanded it
much
out.
more simpler. 4 is less than 10, therefore easier for me.
So he's got eight tiers, but he very much like Gent said, he sort of chunks it up. So at the bottom you've just got the kind of basics, the foundation stuff of can you get people to attend, and will they actually engage in stuff. And then the next much bigger chunk, which he takes the Kirkpatrick model and splits it out into a number of tiers that looks at whether people can make the right decisions, and they get the knowledge to make the right decisions, and then can they actually apply them in real world tasks, in the actual task. So that's sort of split out. But he talks also about the difference between actually being able to do it in the learning environment immediately as you're teaching them, and then actually then remembering how to do it later, a few days later. Very different. And actually you need to be able to remember to then take it into your workplace. So then that's the next tier, it's transfer, and then the effects of transfer, which is the impact stuff. But what you were saying as well also speaks to he also talks a lot about making sure the environment is right. So has the learner got the support in order to transfer, to take what they've learned into the workplace? Have they got the motivation? Have they got all the resources that they need? Have they got the will? So it does speak, like there's a whole, it's not just, here's some e-learning, off you go. And it's not just, I know I need to coach these people. Just go off and do it. There is a whole a load of stuff that's got to support that. And you've got to be uncomfortable with not knowing. And that is part of it.
And that was
having permission to be uncomfortable.
It must have been 9 years ago. I was fortunate enough to do a webinar with an absolute genius on DE&I. She had she had worked at Google and kind of founded this whole massive study on why it's important. And I said, listen, and oddly, interesting enough, I always said, I don't understand the ROI of it. Like companies are obviously investing in it. Why? And she was like, well, it's actually, if people don't feel comfortable for whatever reason it could be, whether perceived, real, whatever, they're not going to be their best self on the job. And she's like, for us and for me at Google, that's what it was about, is how do I get everybody to show up and kind of remove whatever they have, either whatever they have or whatever people are pushing down upon them, to allow them to, again, do whatever, speak up in a meeting and give that innovative idea that they've been trapped inside and haven't been willing to be open to coaching, to getting better, to admitting that you're wrong. And I mean, it seems like, I don't know how much you're experiencing it, but these days I feel like it's become even more, like the bar is even lower. It's like, do I have time in my day to invest in myself? And I feel like that is almost one of the biggest barriers now. You talk about like that ecosystem and that comfortableness of, if I go to my boss and I say, I know you really wanted me to get you this report, but I have this 2-hour long training session on becoming a better communicator. Who's comfortable telling their boss that? I think today that must be, the time has become so important.
Yeah, and psychological safety in in the opportunities that you've got to practice. So can you take what you've learned and then practice it, and then know that you'll either get really good feedback from your peers, or it won't matter if you make a mistake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, so something I wanted to talk on, because I'm keenly interested in it, and I saw it, and I apologize, I saw it, but then I forgot the name of it. It's something we're doing, which is leveraging technology for virtual coaching, like AI coaching, on the spot coaching, whatever you want to call it, coaching in the flow of work. Because for me, that's how I tend to prefer to learn is, I have this problem, I'm very problem answer kind of thing, or challenge answer, challenge solution. And so for me, that works out really well, where this idea of having a coach that I can turn to that doesn't need to be, on camera available whenever I am, but is available exactly when I am, exactly when I need it, and can give me the answer and allow me to explore. So for me, that works, but I know MindTools, I believe, has a product. I don't know how long that product has been out, but I'd love to learn a little bit more about what that product is. And maybe if it's in the field now, what's some of the feedback that you're getting from your learners?
I was waiting for that. So yes, we do have a kind of AI conversations tool, right?
Oh, and M Coach as well.
And M Coach as well. Yeah. So there's two tools, right? Like two different kind of purposes, but generally the same gist is kind of being attacked, which is I want to talk about something specific, like maybe have a difficult conversation, or I want to brainstorm some ideas about how to better communicate, and I don't want to go through all the resources available. I don't want to go through a longer course. I just want to kind of have an answer that is more very, very, very hyper personalized to my situation. And that is what that tool does. But the major difference between the tool that is embedded in kind of in our product versus, let's say, ChatGPT or other places is the training data. So that is the major differentiator between us and, let's say, something like MindTools, something like ChatGPT, or other places.
Whatever.
So the key area is that the training data is all our resources, so all of our expertise brought all together in one place, so that whenever you do get an answer, is based on vetted, rigorous, evidence-based
it is
approach.
pulling from the Library of Congress that is better than ChatGPT's Library of Congress.
Yeah.
But how are people, like, what is the usage and adoption of these things? Have you noticed any trends? I feel like a lot of organizations we speak to are eager to try, but we don't have, a mountain of data to really support. Learners love it, they hate it.
I think it's still early stages,
Yeah.
generally for all of these kind of products.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, like Googling, right? So like go into Google search. Every day Google gets more than 1 trillion searches, right? Like ridiculous amounts of searches. I think ChatGPT interactions are less than a fraction of that. Like it's like 1%, right, in comparison. So we're still very, very, very early in how people utilize AI. Like, keep in mind that maybe we are kind of at the frontier of it. We're always trying to explore it, but there's hundreds of millions of people that probably have never even tried it because they simply never need to, or don't care, or don't trust it.
Or have the fear.
Still lots of barriers. There's a fear to it. Is it useful? Absolutely. I think it kind of democratizes certain areas that were never available to people like maybe myself, Gemma, you. A coach costs a lot of money, right? So being able to have that bespoke conversation to some degree is incredibly useful. There's unintended consequences, but for us at the moment, it's very useful.
What are some of the unintended consequences?
I knew you were going to ask that, Nolan. That was a trap for
It
you
was
to
too
ask.
easy.
Yeah. No, this has been spoken about for quite some time in the academic literature, right? Like is the transfer of, for example, cognitive load on the AI. So you kind of offload thinking to a machine, and they can have unintended consequences long term about skills acquisition, application, right? If I am used to writing code, Nolan, and I have to work through it, asking AI to write the code for me, I lose that muscle memory of how to structure the code, and all of a sudden depend on AI structuring to some degree, especially if I'm an early learner. I mean, we literally gave a talk in the company event that we had recently, and the key major difference of how AI helps people is if you're an expert in something and you use AI, it makes you better at it, right? So you just become more efficient and more productive. If you don't know what you're doing and you use AI on it, it makes you way worse because it just exacerbates because you don't know what you don't know. And so whatever it spits out, you don't have the expertise to kind of judge the outcome, right? So you don't understand whether it's going
Yeah.
in the right direction or not.
Yeah, I equate it to I was just had this conversation with someone and I said, it's something like really simple, right? If you're a graphic artist and you had to learn the reason of why typefaces, the kerning, the spacing between the text is a
Uh,
certain way and the padding on each side. If you had to learn why that's important and actually had to use Photoshop and do it, you would have a certain level of expectation. But then if you went to a ChatGPT and you just had it do all of it, it would definitely get you there faster. And if you took somebody off the streets who knew nothing, they would get you there much, much quicker. But you've essentially peaked. That's where you have peaked because you're not learning a new thing. You are your skill is the ability to leverage AI, and there's no knowledge behind that skill. So it is really like I feel like that's the generation, like the first, the people we're onboarding today are going to experience that problem in a major way because they're going to be much more productive than
it,
possibly the generation before, but they're not going to have the pain of having to deal with it the hard way.
it's not necessarily the hard way. I would say it's just losing the process by
Right.
which you
Yeah.
get the outcome, right? Like, I don't know if you guys saw the picture that won Nature's, I think,
Right.
best
Yeah. Yeah.
category, like was an
Yeah.
AI generated one, and the author did that. But the reason why the author can do something like that is because he can describe to an AI what lens to use, what
Hmm.
camera angle to use, the approach. He can describe in technical detail the aspect of the pictures he wants changed, and ChatGPT may understand that because it's trained on data from photographies and photographs and technical documentation, right? So, but I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to tell ChatGPT do this in this way with this kind of camera lens in this manner. Aside,
Yeah. Yeah. It's the when I was in school, I said, why do I need to learn this math when I have a calculator?
yeah,
But they still
it's
teach you what
foundation.
one, they still teach you what 1 + 1
Yeah,
is because it's important for foundational knowledge.
And to be able to critically assess
yeah,
and critically analyze whether or not it's got it right.
And
And
that
you can't then work out what's gone wrong if you don't
yeah,
have that foundation.
and that critical analysis, at least, what we're seeing actually is in sharp, I mean, even before AI, the ability to critically analyze is a skill that is getting worse.
Mm.
At least I should say most of the studies I'm reading are in the United States, where when they look at reading comprehension level in the past, you only look at a literacy rate, which
mm,
at the very top level is just, can you read? Like,
mm,
can you actually read this article? And they're like, yes. So in the United States, what they found is that yes, most people can read, but most people can only comprehend what they're reading, at like a ninth grade level. Like a
mm,
comprehension is actually, but and
mm,
then the ability, and then the percentage of people to understand the intent behind the article is like
mm,
the smallest percentage you could think of in the world.
Mhm.
So your ability to assess why did this article even exist? What is the author trying to get me to know by reading this is even worse. So yeah, as you said, and that skill of, can I read? Yeah, I guess I can. Can I comprehend it? Okay, but can I interpret why this was written in the first place? We already are facing a shortage of, at least in the United States, and I'm fearful of what the tools will do to exasperate
This is
that.
why measurement is important, man. This is because if we were measuring the intended consequence or unintended consequence, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
that's why
absolutely.
this stuff is important.
So, we talked a little bit about AI, and particularly on the coaching side. Are there other areas where, AI or other technology you feel is really making our lives a lot easier on the measurement of it? of a lot of these manager training programs, leadership training programs.
Gemma, what do you think?
Sorry, could you say the question again?
Yeah, so we just talked about how using AI and tech was more helping on the, like the actual code, using it to respond to a message. So the application of it in day to day. But then we have the kind of the theme of, well, how can we take that same technology and AI and use it to get us better predictions of measurement, ROI, analytics? How is technology helping us on that end of the spectrum?
Well, I mean, again, are you using AI? I mean, obviously we're, for instance, we've produced a whole raft of adaptive learning modules. And from that, we get lots and lots of data that this incredibly detailed data, and it's slightly different from what we just get from like an average SCORM
Right.
SCORM
Yeah,
package,
yeah.
for instance. In AI you can get verbal and written questions, so you can do a different type of analysis on that. But I mean, this is, I guess, Gent's bag with using AI and different types of data that we can get a bit more easily.
I think they definitely, as I said before, right? Like if you know kind of what you're doing, they definitely speed up everything for you. It's just
Yeah.
more helpful, especially for example, for qualitative data. Before, for anyone that has done qualitative analysis before, wow, what a pain. Like if you do 20 interviews, on average, that's 2 hours to transcribe and 4 hours to analyze. That's the
Yes.
usual timeline that it takes. So 20 interviews, and then if you want to be rigorous about it, you would have to analyze. Another coder would have to analyze too, so you can match the themes and see whether or not the themes are biased or not biased. Now that cannot be replaced by AI because it's either you have two different types of AIs doing the same analysis and getting to a convergence. You can't take away the rigor. If you really want to be rigorous, you'll still have to kind of do it that way.
Yep.
But for very kind of light touch qualitative analysis, AI definitely speeds everything up, right? Transcribes for you already. You can do a fast kind of analysis, and I would still encourage people to actually read the transcripts and understand what's going on, because AI will pick and choose specific concepts
Yes.
based on statistical probability. It's not actually reasoning why it's picking those things. There can be underlying messages behind text that AI won't pick up. So it's just good to have a look. We also have biases, but nevertheless, um, I would definitely worry a little bit if you're using AI to do data analysis on the quantitative side, just because you should understand at least some foundations of statistics before kind of going down that road, right? Like, because there are a lot of things that you have to check. There are a lot of assumptions that
Yes.
need to be met if you want to do statistical analysis. Like, if you want to do a regression, you would have to pick the type of regression you're doing based on the data that you have, based on the dependent variables, so the thing that you're trying to predict. All of those things matter a lot when you do it. Otherwise, you can get a very, very wrong answer that you need
Yeah,
to sit on.
a false positive for sure. Yeah,
Positive.
and I, as somebody who had to calculate by hand regression analysis,
Okay.
I
Oh,
don't know
no.
why. I was the last one in my whole university. It was part of they're like, oh yeah, now they just have a like they had a software for 10 years, but they're like, you can actually multiply these two matrices. And I felt like I was Goodwill Hunting. And I mean, I got a B in the
It feels
class, but
good.
I
It
thought I was the
definitely feels
smartest man
good.
in the world because I did like
Yeah.
the simplest version of it. But yeah, I think, you know, yes, AI, what I have found, will give you an answer. It's like, I don't know. It's like so eager to please. It's like a golden
Yeah.
retriever
Yeah.
puppy. It just wants to make you happy, and it will do whatever it takes to make you happy. And I think if you realize that's where AI is, and you look at it, okay, this is a puppy dog who just wants to fetch,
Yeah.
then you can at least, then you're looking at it with the right tent on those lenses is what I recommend to a lot of people. But I don't think we're quite there for a lot of measurement and analytic. That there's a lot of things that it still takes manual input, obviously, but it can help you identify where are the little weeds, like where are the sprouts that may have deep roots. Like we talked about kind of our AI coaching tool. It would take so long to try to read through every, you know,
All the
a 10,000
transcripts, all
person
the discussions.
organization, everything that your employees were typing into there to act. And so, you know, maybe you're not making a huge decision out of it, but maybe all you're trying to do is, what is the overall sentiment of the questions? Or like, what are the top questions? And like, it can scan mountains of text in a second and pinpoint it. And again, you still have to go through and like, okay, this, you know, it's saying the overall sentiment is anger. Okay, well, let me actually find 50 people who have said, you know, okay, I hate my boss. Well, how do I get a job or whatever it is? But I think that's where the promise lies. And then I think you know, I don't know if you've done much with like Microsoft's graph database and the idea that it's going to sit on top of everything you do and actually tell you what kind of manager you are, right? Are you assertive? Are you dominant? Whatever. All those tools that collect that aren't there yet. And like, it's a very dangerous game if you think they're there. So consider those tools puppy dogs.
Keep in mind as well for these kind of things, and a lot of things that happens in organizations, AI models and again, they're based on probabilities. They are trained on codifiable data.
Yeah.
Right? There is a lot of uncodifiable data in organizations that you cannot feed an algorithm.
Yeah.
And so there is that angle too that you have to account for. You know, as humans, we're definitely fallible and we're definitely very silly sometimes.
Well,
And
you two are, but don't speak for me. I'm not fallible.
I agree.
Please, please don't
Yeah.
don't lump me in with you mere mortals, please.
Yeah, exactly. But it just goes to show, you know, I literally, Gemma, you asked me if I use AI. Like I used it the other day to just do like a quick rundown of a spreadsheet, and I needed a specific type of average, right? So rather than the mean, I needed the mode.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to just, and it will give you naturally one average, but it may not be the mode. It may be the median, or it may be the mean, right?
Yeah.
So you kind of have to know what you're looking for. Otherwise, it's just going to assume and it's going to do the analysis based on that assumption. And then whatever the outcome is going to be incredibly different.
Yeah.
Well, this is a great time to stop the podcast, because if I have to dig into my mind to remember the difference between the mean, median, and mode, we've now essentially reached the tipping point in which I am no longer able to talk, and so it's a perfect time to end. I am going to look it up afterwards so that I can just remind myself of the mean, median, and mode. I mean, how many times did I hear that? And I haven't used it in forever, so I need to use it again. But thank you three of us. Thank you two for joining us. It's been absolutely a pleasure just talking, you know, all things ROI and obviously kind of a bend into, I feel like we kind of ended up, you know, speaking almost like, you know, Terminator kind of end of days with AI. But appreciate kind of working with us along those things and for joining us. It's really been a great session.
Well, thanks for having us. It's been great to
Yeah,
chat.
and we'll talk again soon. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.